She stepped into the bank that morning with a sense of purpose. Her day had started like any other, with the usual rush of traffic and the hum of city life outside. She had errands to run, a few transactions to complete, and a busy schedule that she needed to manage. The sun was streaming through the tall glass windows, and the soft buzz of activity inside the bank made her feel calm, even though her mind was focused on the tasks ahead. She approached the counter with a confident stride, smiling politely at the staff who greeted her with a nod. Everything seemed ordinary, normal, and routine. She had been coming to this branch for years and had never faced any trouble. Today, however, she could sense something was slightly off the moment the manager, a middle-aged man with a crisp white shirt and a stiff demeanor, glanced at her. His eyes lingered a little too long, and there was a tightness in his expression that made her pause for a second. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I need to make a deposit and update my account details." The manager looked at her as if he had seen something suspicious. "Can I see some identification first?" he asked, his tone polite but with a hint of doubt. She handed over her ID without hesitation. "Of course," she replied, keeping her smile. "Here you go." He scrutinized the card carefully as if he had never seen an ID before. She noticed the subtle signs of discomfort in his posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way he kept glancing at her over the top of his glasses. She had learned to recognize this kind of behavior over the years. It was the same expression that flashed across people's faces when they judged someone before knowing them, when they made assumptions based on appearance alone. "I'm going to need you to step aside for a moment," the manager said suddenly, gesturing toward a small side office. She paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Step aside? For what?" "Just some routine verification," he replied, his tone casual but firm. "We have procedures to follow." She felt a twinge of irritation but kept it under control. She had dealt with biased treatment before, and she knew that losing her temper would only give him the reaction he wanted. She followed him to the office, her posture straight, her eyes calm, not letting his behavior shake her. Once inside, the manager shut the door behind them. "We've had some suspicious activity in this branch recently," he began. "And, well, you fit a certain profile, so I'm going to have to call security." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Excuse me?" she asked, surprised at how casually he had framed it. "Suspicious activity? I've been coming here for years. I've never had any issues." He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Yes, well, protocols. We have to be careful. It's for everyone's safety." She could feel a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and frustration, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I assure you there's nothing suspicious about me. I'm here to do standard banking just like any other customer." He hesitated, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he made a call. She listened silently as he spoke, realizing that he was asking for someone higher up to intervene, and then she heard the words that made her stop for a moment. "Yes, I think we might need the FBI." Her heart skipped a beat. "The FBI? Over a routine banking visit?" She looked at him incredulously. "You're calling the FBI on me?" she asked, keeping her voice steady but firm. "Yes, I just want to make sure," he said, not meeting her gaze. "Better safe than sorry." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had faced prejudice before, but this was blatant. It was a test of her patience and her composure. She reminded herself that she had worked too hard and come too far to be intimidated in a moment like this. "Sir, I have identification. I have all the documents you could possibly need, and I've done nothing wrong. I'm asking you politely to reconsider." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to frown at her, as if his suspicion alone was proof of something. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. She could feel it pressing against her chest, but she refused to let it break her. She straightened her shoulders and decided that she would not react with anger or fear. She would meet this challenge with composure and clarity, because she knew the power of dignity in moments like this. A few moments later, she heard the sound of a phone click. He was on hold, waiting for someone to come and validate his decision. She realized that he had called the FBI, as absurd as it sounded. She felt a strange mix of emotions: annoyance at the unnecessary escalation, a little fear of what might come next, and a steely determination to handle it correctly. She looked around the small office. The room was plain, with gray walls and a desk that had seen better days. There was a faint hum from the air conditioning, but otherwise it was quiet, almost eerily calm compared to the storm brewing between her and the manager. She reminded herself to breathe slow and steady. She was not the one out of line. She was not the one causing suspicion. She had the truth and she would hold on to it. The manager finally hung up the phone. "They're on their way," he said a little more hesitantly than before. She raised an eyebrow. "On their way? You actually called the FBI on a customer for no reason?" He shuffled some papers nervously. "We have to follow protocol," he muttered. She smiled slightly, a calm, knowing smile. "Protocol doesn't mean targeting someone unfairly. I've done nothing wrong and I have the right to be treated fairly. You're making a mistake and I hope you understand that the consequences could be serious." He looked at her, clearly uncomfortable now, realizing that she was not a typical person who would be cowed or intimidated. There was strength in her gaze, a quiet confidence that made it impossible to dismiss her as insignificant. She stepped closer, maintaining a polite but firm tone. "I suggest you call your supervisors before this escalates further. You're about to make a very poor decision based on prejudice, not facts." The manager looked away, his hands fidgeting with his pen. She could see him calculating, realizing that she was correct. He had underestimated her, assuming she would be scared, assuming she would back down. But she had faced bias before and she had learned the power of patience, clarity, and courage. As she waited, she thought about the many times in life when she had faced unfair treatment. Every challenge had taught her something valuable: to remain composed, to assert herself, and to trust her instincts. This was no different. She was not alone in this moment. She carried with her years of experience, wisdom, and the knowledge that integrity and professionalism would always shine through. The door opened slightly, and she caught a glimpse of someone approaching. Someone in uniform. She realized it was the FBI agents who had been called. Her heart rate increased slightly, not with fear but with anticipation. Finally, the moment of truth was about to arrive. She adjusted her posture, straightened her jacket, and gave a calm, steady nod to the manager. "I hope you understand the gravity of this situation," she said one more time. He nodded slowly, though it was clear he was embarrassed, uncomfortable, and perhaps beginning to realize his mistake. She turned slightly, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had done everything possible to maintain her dignity and composure. And then the door opened fully, and 2 FBI agents entered. They glanced around briefly, their expressions professional, but one of them paused when they looked at her. There was an almost immediate recognition of who was right and who had made a mistake. She could feel their respect even before a word was spoken, and it gave her a quiet satisfaction. She had stood her ground, and now the world was about to acknowledge the truth. The FBI agents stepped inside the small office, their presence commanding yet calm. They moved with a quiet confidence that immediately shifted the atmosphere. The manager, who had seemed so assured only moments ago, now looked nervous and uncertain. He straightened his tie and tried to regain some control, but it was clear he felt out of his depth. The woman stayed composed, her posture steady, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk. She had dealt with prejudice before, but this was different. Now authority had entered the room in a form that could validate her side of the story. She took a slow breath and prepared to explain herself clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. One of the agents, a tall man with a calm voice, looked at her and nodded. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened here?" She met his gaze and began calmly recounting the events. She spoke slowly and clearly, explaining how she had come to the bank to conduct routine transactions, how the manager had insisted on seeing her identification, and how he had escalated the situation unnecessarily. She described his tone, his gestures, and the moment he had mentioned calling the FBI. She spoke without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. But there was a quiet strength in her voice that left no doubt about her credibility. The agent nodded as he listened, taking notes but also observing her demeanor. It was clear that he was impressed by her composure. "And you have identification and all the necessary documents?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, lifting her ID and the papers she had brought with her. "Everything is in order. I have done nothing wrong. I simply want to conduct my banking as any customer would." The other agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a serious expression, glanced at the manager. "And what is your explanation for this situation?" she asked. The manager cleared his throat, fidgeting with his pen. I just wanted to follow protocol. There have been incidents recently and we have to be careful. It's routine verification. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her calm. Protocol does not mean targeting someone unfairly. I am a customer. I am law-abiding and professional. This is harassment, plain and simple. The agents exchanged a glance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she noticed it. They clearly understood the situation better than the manager did. There was a brief moment of silence, the kind that makes the tension in a room almost tangible. The manager shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his authority and judgment were being quietly questioned. One of the agents stepped forward slightly. Sir, we need to understand the facts here, not assumptions. Can you explain why you thought it was necessary to involve us? The manager hesitated. I felt something was off. She seemed unusual. The agent raised an eyebrow. Unusual? Can you clarify what you mean by that? He struggled to answer. I don't know. Just her behavior. I thought it was suspicious. The woman's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. You thought I was suspicious because of how I look? There is no other reason. I am simply here to do my work. You made a decision based on bias, not facts. The agents looked at each other again, and the woman could sense the unspoken acknowledgement. They recognized her truth. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the unfairness of the situation was being validated by professionals who had authority. She had kept her composure, and now that strength was being recognized. The female agent spoke, her voice firm but measured. Sir, it is clear that you escalated this situation unnecessarily. There is no evidence of wrongdoing on her part. Your actions were based on assumptions, not facts. The manager swallowed hard, looking suddenly small and uneasy. I didn't mean any harm. I was just following protocol. The woman leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but assertive. Following protocol does not mean treating someone unfairly. There is a difference between caution and prejudice. You crossed that line. It is important that you understand the consequences of your actions. One of the agents made a note and then turned to her. Ma'am, can you show us any documents that prove your purpose here today? She handed over her papers and ID without hesitation. Every document was in order, everything perfectly organized. She could feel the tension in the room easing slightly as the agents reviewed the materials. It was as if the truth itself was a shield, protecting her from the unfair assumptions that had threatened to derail her day. The agents examined the papers, then looked at her with a slight nod of respect. Everything checks out, the male agent said. There is no reason for any suspicion. You have handled this situation very well, and we appreciate your patience and professionalism. A small, quiet smile appeared on her face. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Recognition from authority, acknowledgement that she was right, and validation that her composure had been the correct response. She had stayed calm, clear, and professional, and it had made all the difference. The manager shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his actions were being documented and judged. He avoided her eyes, and she could feel the subtle shift in power. For once, she was not at the mercy of bias and prejudice. Instead, she was being acknowledged for her intelligence, composure, and integrity. The female agent turned to the manager. Sir, we recommend that you review this situation with your supervisors and consider the implications of your actions. Harassment and discrimination are serious issues, and it is important to handle customers with fairness and respect. The manager nodded slowly, clearly embarrassed. He knew he had overstepped, and there was no easy way to defend his behavior. The woman remained calm, watching him, aware that this moment was not just about her. It was about accountability and justice. The agents finished their assessment and nodded to her. You have handled this situation admirably, the male agent said. It is not easy to remain composed under such circumstances, but you did so with professionalism and dignity. We salute you for that. Her heart lifted slightly. She had not expected praise, not from strangers, but it felt empowering. It was a recognition of her strength, her intelligence, and her courage. She had turned what could have been a humiliating experience into a demonstration of integrity and composure. The manager remained silent, clearly aware of his mistake. The woman decided to take one final step before leaving. She addressed him directly, her voice calm but firm. I hope you understand the impact of your actions today. This was not just a mistake. It was a lesson in how assumptions and bias can cause harm. I expect that you will reflect on this and ensure it does not happen again, either to me or to anyone else. He nodded quietly, unable to offer more than that. She turned toward the agents. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I appreciate your attention and fairness." The agents nodded and left, leaving her alone in the office with the manager. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her bag, and prepared to leave. The manager made no attempt to stop her. He had learned his lesson in a quiet, undeniable way. As she walked out of the office, she felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Relief that the situation had been handled, and satisfaction that she had maintained her dignity and been recognized for her composure. She had faced an unfair challenge and turned it into an opportunity to assert herself with strength and clarity. Other bank staff and customers had watched from a distance. She could feel their curiosity and perhaps their admiration. It was a small victory, but an important one. She had shown that bias and prejudice could be confronted, that patience and professionalism mattered, and that authority could be used to correct injustice. She left the bank with a renewed sense of confidence. The day was still busy, the city still bustling, but she carried with her a sense of empowerment. She knew that the manager would think twice before ever treating another customer unfairly. She knew that the recognition from the FBI agents was not just a personal triumph, but a validation of her principles. Calmness, clarity, dignity, and integrity. As she walked down the street, she reflected on how often people are judged unfairly, how often assumptions can lead to unnecessary conflict, and how rare it is for authority to intervene fairly and recognize the truth. Today had been one of those rare moments. Today justice had been quiet, composed, and undeniable. And she felt deep down that this was only the beginning. Standing her ground had not only protected her dignity, but had set a precedent. She had shown that one person, calm, intelligent, and determined, could turn an unjust situation into a moment of accountability and recognition. She had faced bias, remained unshaken, and come out stronger on the other side. The office was quiet after the agents had left, but the tension lingered. The manager sat behind his desk, fidgeting with papers that no longer mattered, while she stood near the doorway, her posture calm and unwavering. She could feel the weight of the moment, the balance of authority and fairness, and she knew this was the turning point. She had remained composed, and now it was time to address the situation fully, to assert herself in a way that would ensure the truth could not be ignored. She looked at the manager, her voice steady but firm. "Sir, I want to make sure you understand what just happened. You called the FBI on me for no reason. Your actions were based entirely on assumptions and bias. That is unacceptable." He avoided her gaze, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled more papers. I was just trying to be careful," he muttered, almost as if repeating a mantra to convince himself. She shook her head slowly. "Being careful does not mean targeting someone unfairly. You had no evidence, no justification, and yet you escalated this situation unnecessarily. Do you see now how serious this is?" He remained silent, clearly aware of the gravity of his mistake. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to maintain her calm. She had faced bias and unfair treatment before, but today was different. Today the truth had the backing of authority, and that gave her the confidence to take the next step. "I want to be clear," she continued. "This is not just about today. It is about accountability. Your actions have consequences, and it is important that you understand them. The FBI recognized that there was no reason to suspect me, and your judgment has been called into question." The manager swallowed hard, the color in his face changing slightly. He knew she was right. There was no argument he could make that would excuse his behavior. He had acted impulsively, influenced by bias, and now he had to face the reality of his actions. She decided to remain in control of the situation, knowing that her composure was her greatest strength. "I am giving you the opportunity to take responsibility here. You need to acknowledge your mistake and take steps to ensure it never happens again. This is not optional. Fairness and respect are not negotiable." He hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, he muttered, I understand. I made a mistake." She nodded, her expression serious but not angry. "Acknowledgement is the first step, but it is not enough. Actions must follow words. You will need to inform your supervisors and explain your behavior honestly. This cannot be swept under the rug." The manager nodded again, clearly humbled. She could see that he was beginning to grasp the impact of his actions, not just on her, but on the integrity of the institution he represented. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had navigated this, difficult moment with clarity and poise. She then turned her attention to the bank staff who had been quietly observing from the counters outside the office. She addressed them directly, her voice calm but firm. "I hope everyone here understands that fairness and professionalism are not optional. Customers deserve respect, and assumptions should never guide your actions. This is a lesson for all of us." Some of the staff nodded quietly while others looked uncomfortable. It was clear that her words had left an impression. She had spoken not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been judged unfairly or treated unjustly. Her courage in that moment was a reminder of the power of dignity and composure. She returned her gaze to the manager. "You have the opportunity now to do the right thing. You can start by reporting this incident accurately, taking full responsibility and making amends. Anything less would be a disservice to yourself and to the people who trust this institution." The manager nodded slowly, clearly realizing that he had no choice. She could see the shift in his demeanor, the transformation from arrogance and prejudice to humility and understanding. It was a subtle but profound change, and she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. As she prepared to leave the office, she reflected on the events of the day. It had begun as a routine visit to the bank, but it had escalated into a confrontation with bias and prejudice. She had faced an attempt to intimidate her, yet she had remained calm and professional, and now the truth had been acknowledged. She had not just defended herself, she had set a precedent for accountability and fairness. Before stepping out, she addressed the manager one final time. "Remember this moment. Let it guide how you treat others in the future. Fairness, respect, and professionalism are not optional. They are essential. Learn from this and ensure it never happens again." He nodded quietly, clearly affected by her words. She could sense that he would carry the lesson with him, a reminder of the consequences of bias and assumptions. It was a small victory, but an important one. She had turned a situation of potential humiliation into an opportunity for change, not just for herself, but for the institution as a whole. As she walked toward the exit, she felt a sense of empowerment. The city outside was still bustling, the streets filled with people going about their day, unaware of the quiet victory that had just taken place inside the bank. She felt proud, not because she had won a confrontation, but because she had handled it with integrity and strength. She had demonstrated the power of composure, clarity, and courage in the face of prejudice. Outside, the sun shone brightly, and she took a deep breath, letting the warmth fill her with a renewed sense of purpose. She thought about how often people are judged unfairly, how assumptions can lead to conflict, and how rare it is to have authority recognize the truth. Today had been one of those rare moments. Today, justice had arrived quietly, professionally, and unmistakably. She began walking down the street, her steps measured and confident. She thought about the lessons of the day: patience in the face of provocation, the importance of standing firm in truth, and the quiet power of composure. She had faced an unfair situation, but she had turned it into an opportunity to assert her dignity and set an example. As she walked, she reflected on the subtle ways bias can influence behavior, and the importance of challenging it when it appears. She thought about the manager and how his assumptions had led him astray, but she also understood that change was possible. People could learn, grow, and do better if held accountable. Today had proven that. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, reminding her of other tasks and appointments, but she ignored it for a moment. She allowed herself to savor the moment of victory, the quiet triumph of integrity over prejudice. It was a reminder that strength was not just physical or loud, it was composed, patient, and unwavering. As she continued her walk, she noticed the small details of the city around her, the way sunlight reflected off the glass buildings, the chatter of people in cafes, the honking of cars in the distance. Everything seemed sharper, clearer, as if her own clarity had sharpened her perception of the world. She felt present, fully aware of her surroundings and her own strength. She thought about the potential impact of her actions, not just on the manager or the bank, but on anyone who might hear about the story later. She realized that standing firm, speaking clearly, and maintaining composure could inspire others to do the same. She had turned a personal challenge into a lesson in courage and professionalism that could resonate far beyond that small office. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done the right thing. Today had not been easy, and the stress of the confrontation still lingered. but it was overshadowed by the sense of justice and empowerment that came from standing firm in truth. She continued walking, her mind turning to other matters but her heart carrying the quiet pride of a victory, earned through patience, courage, and integrity. She knew the road ahead would have challenges, as life always did, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had faced bias, remained unshaken, and emerged stronger. And as she disappeared into the busy streets, her steps confident and purposeful, it was clear that this day had changed something, not just in the bank, not just in the manager, but in herself. She had asserted her dignity, set an example, and reminded the world that composure, clarity, and courage could overcome prejudice even in the most unexpected places. This ends part 3, focusing on the turning point where she fully asserts herself, holds the manager accountable, and gains a sense of empowerment. The story remains human-centric, suspenseful, and relatable while maintaining engagement for viewers. After the confrontation in the office, she knew the day was far from over. The manager had been humbled, yes, but his actions needed to be fully addressed. She walked toward the main area of the bank, her steps steady, her mind focused. This was not just about standing up for herself. It was about ensuring that the same injustice could not happen to anyone else. Every step she took was a reminder to herself that courage and action went hand in hand. The bank staff looked up as she passed by, some curious, others uneasy. They had witnessed the tension, the confrontation, and now they saw her moving with quiet confidence. She understood that her actions, in the next moments, would not only resolve her situation but also set a precedent for how customers and staff should be treated in the future. She approached the manager once more, her expression firm but calm. "I need to speak with you again," she said, her voice steady. He looked up, clearly anxious. He knew that she was not finished with the matter. "This cannot end with a simple acknowledgement," she continued. "You need to take responsibility in a way that shows you understand the seriousness of your actions." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I understand. I will do what needs to be done," he said, his voice quieter than before. She gestured toward a small conference room nearby. "We should speak somewhere private. It is important that we handle this properly without distractions." He hesitated but eventually followed her. She closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "First," she began, "you need to formally report your actions to the higher management of this bank. You need to explain exactly what you did, why you made that decision, and acknowledge that it was influenced by assumptions rather than facts." He looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable. I will do that. I don't want anyone else to experience this, and I don't want my actions to reflect poorly on the bank." She nodded, her expression serious. "Good. That is the right step. But it is not enough to just report it. You need to ensure that changes are made so that this kind of incident cannot happen again. The staff needs to be trained on how to interact with customers fairly, respectfully, and without bias." He nodded again, slowly. "Yes, I understand. I will implement the training and review procedures." "Very well," she said, "but I want to make one thing clear. This is not just about policies. It is about accountability. You have to understand the impact your actions had not just on me, but on the trust people place in this institution. You cannot take that lightly." The manager swallowed and nodded. "I understand. I see now how serious this was." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She had come into this bank for routine business and had faced prejudice, fear, and unfair judgment. But now, through composure, clarity, and decisive action, she was ensuring that justice was not only acknowledged but acted upon. She realized that moments like this, difficult as they were, could create real change. She paused for a moment, considering the next step. "I also want to speak to your supervisors," she said. "It is important that they are fully aware of what happened, and that they support the actions necessary to prevent this from happening again." He hesitated, clearly nervous, but finally agreed. "I will arrange a meeting with them immediately," he said. She nodded, satisfied. "Good, and one more thing," she continued. "I expect a follow-up. I want to know what steps are taken, how staff are trained, and what measures are put in place to prevent this kind of discrimination. I will not accept vague assurances. This must be concrete." He nodded again, understanding the seriousness in her tone. "I will provide a full report," he promised. Satisfied that the immediate actions were in motion, she decided to leave the room and make sure that the bank staff had witnessed her approach to the matter. She walked back through the main area, her steps confident, her eyes meeting those of employees and customers alike. There was a sense of quiet respect in the air. Some nodded subtly, others watched in silence, perhaps realizing that standing up for oneself required courage, clarity, and calm composure. She approached a few staff members individually, speaking softly but firmly. "It is important that everyone here understands the importance of fairness and professionalism. Bias and assumptions have no place in your work. Treat customers with respect, listen carefully, and ensure that your actions are guided by facts, not prejudice." Some nodded, clearly taking her words to heart. It was a subtle change, but one that mattered. By speaking directly to them, she was creating awareness, planting a seed of understanding that could grow into meaningful change. After addressing the staff, she returned to the manager, who was waiting in a corner of the main hall. "I expect that your next steps will be thorough and transparent," she said. "This is not just about correcting a single mistake. It is about ensuring that fairness and integrity are upheld in this institution." He nodded, his expression serious. "I understand. I will take responsibility fully and ensure the necessary steps are taken." She allowed herself a small, quiet smile. This was the outcome she had hoped for: accountability, acknowledgement, and the promise of change. It was not just a personal victory. It was a step toward a better environment for everyone who would walk into that bank in the future. As she prepared to leave, she reflected on how far she had come in handling the situation. From the moment the manager had acted out of bias to the arrival of the FBI agents and the subsequent confrontation, every step had required patience, clarity, and strength. She had faced fear, frustration, and potential humiliation, but by remaining composed, she had turned the situation into one of empowerment and accountability. She walked out of the bank and into the sunlight, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. The city outside was alive with movement and energy, but she felt a quiet sense of calm amidst the chaos. She had not only defended herself but had ensured that her actions could lead to meaningful change. As she walked down the street, she thought about the importance of speaking up, of holding others accountable, and of demanding fairness. She realized that change often began with one person refusing to accept injustice, one person standing firm in truth and clarity. Today had been that moment for her. She paused for a moment at a crosswalk, taking in the bustling scene around her. People rushed past, some unaware of the small but significant battle that had taken place just blocks away. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that her courage had created ripples that might influence others, that might inspire someone else to stand up for fairness and integrity. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, reminding her of her next appointment, but she ignored it for a moment. She allowed herself to savor the sense of accomplishment and empowerment. She had faced a challenge, navigated it with composure, and ensured that justice was served. As she continued her walk, she thought about the manager and the lessons he had learned. He would now carry the memory of this day with him, a reminder that assumptions and prejudice could lead to serious consequences. But she also thought about the staff, the customers, and the wider community. Her actions had set an example, a reminder that fairness, clarity, and courage mattered in every interaction. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that she had turned a difficult and unfair situation into an opportunity for accountability and change. She had shown that standing up for oneself, doing so with calmness and clarity, could create real impact. By the time she reached her destination, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Today had been challenging, stressful, and unfair at first, but it had ended with empowerment, accountability, and the promise of better treatment for others. She had turned adversity into an opportunity for justice, and she knew that the lessons of the day would stay with her, guiding her in the future. She took a final deep breath, letting the sense of accomplishment and calm wash over her. She had faced bias, fear, and prejudice, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more empowered. She had not only defended herself, but had taken steps to ensure fairness and accountability for everyone who might encounter similar situations in the future. The day had been long and challenging, yet as she walked away from the bank, she felt a profound sense of clarity and strength. The streets were bustling with people, cars honking, and vendors calling out their wares, but she felt almost apart from the chaos. She had navigated a situation that could have been humiliating, intimidating, and unfair, and she had emerged not only unshaken but empowered. She knew that the events of this day were more than a personal victory. They were a reminder of the power of patience, composure, and courage. As she walked, she reflected on the moments that had led to this point. The manager's suspicion, fueled by bias, had been the spark for a confrontation that could have escalated into something far more difficult. Yet through calmness and clarity, she had turned that situation around. The FBI agents had arrived, assessing the facts, recognizing her composure, and validating her actions. She had been treated fairly at last, and the manager had been held accountable. She thought about the lessons that would remain with her long after this day. First, the importance of standing firm. Fear or intimidation could easily make someone back down, but she had refused to give that power to anyone. Instead, she had used composure as her shield and truth as her weapon. Each step, each calm word had chipped away at the manager's misplaced authority and bias, ultimately revealing his errors for what they were. She smiled slightly at the memory of how he had fidgeted, clearly realizing he had misjudged her. There had been no anger in her words, no aggression, only clarity, calmness, and unwavering confidence. That had been her true strength. She understood now more than ever that confrontation was not about loudness or force. It was about maintaining integrity and demanding fairness without surrendering to emotion or fear. As she continued her walk, she also reflected on the importance of accountability. The manager had been forced to acknowledge his mistakes, to face the consequences, and to take steps toward change. It was not just about what had happened to her. It was about ensuring that no one else would suffer from similar prejudice in that bank. She had turned a personal challenge into an opportunity for broader impact. Her thoughts turned to the staff members who had observed the events. They had seen her calmness, her clarity, and her ability to demand fairness without aggression. She hoped they had understood the lesson too, that every customer deserved respect and every assumption needed to be challenged. She realized that one act of courage could ripple outward, influencing not just one individual but a whole community. The sunlight fell warmly on her face, and she felt a sense of peace amidst the busy city life around her. She had achieved something rare. She had faced bias, injustice, and fear, and had turned it into a moment of empowerment and accountability. That realization brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal triumph. She thought about the manager again, imagining him reflecting on the day's events. He would remember how she had stood firm, how her composure had left no room for misjudgment, and how accountability had become inevitable. She hoped that he would truly learn from the experience, that the lesson would guide his behavior in the future, and that he would treat others with the fairness and respect they deserved. Her mind drifted to the idea of justice. Not the kind seen in movies or newspapers, but the quiet, professional kind. The kind that comes when truth, patience, and integrity meet authority willing to acknowledge reality. The FBI agents had recognized her professionalism, and in doing so had validated her courage. It was a subtle but powerful victory, one that she knew would stay with her for a lifetime. She walked past a small cafe, the smell of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. People inside were chatting, laughing, and enjoying their day. It struck her how ordinary life continued even as extraordinary events unfolded just blocks away. Yet she realized that what she had done today would have lasting effects far beyond the walls of the bank. Standing up for fairness, confronting bias, and demanding accountability were actions that resonated, even if unnoticed by the busy world around her. She paused for a moment, leaning against a lamppost, letting herself reflect fully. She thought about the times in life when people faced prejudice silently, allowing assumptions and fear to dictate their reactions. She had been given a moment to confront such prejudice, and she had used it wisely. Her calm composure had not only protected her dignity, but had also created a ripple of